Welcome to Questions from the Closet. I'm Ben Shalati.
And I'm Charlie Bird. Each episode, we discuss a question we commonly get asked as LGBTQ+ Latter-day Saints.
We're not trying to answer this question or come to a consensus, but simply sharing our perspectives. Today's question is, how do I navigate the gay adolescence? And that's like not the gay youth, like adolescence, plural.
C-E. S-C-E?
Yeah.
I'm only good at spelling if I'm
Because we're not talking about how to get through a bunch of young gays.
there's a swarm of gay adolescents. How do I get through?
No.
They're probably on their way to a Billie Eilish concert. Taylor Swift.
Yeah, there's a lot of places they could be. So maybe you could tell us how to navigate through a sea of gay youths.
Ben and I are not terribly diverse. We share many opinions and life experiences. For example, but you know what? I'm going to switch it up because we're already talking about crowds. Let's talk about concerts.
Okay.
We both like music, but I like going to concerts and Ben doesn't really.
That's true. I don't like going to concerts.
Because it's too loud and there's too many people, he says.
No.
He also says he doesn't like festivals, but he does like Disneyland. And honestly, it's not adding up for me.
I see the contradiction there, but I don't like loud music. Like I'm a very loud person. Like my voice carries and I'm very easy to
Mike,
hear.
could you turn his mic down a little bit? It's just excruciating in my eardrums.
That's very loud. And when I am somewhere and the music is so loud, I'm like yelling at the person a foot from me. They can't hear me. I hate that.
During the concert, you're singing along and you're dancing.
Yeah.
You're putting on your own concert.
Yeah, I just don't like loud music.
Anyway, I went to Taylor Swift last weekend and the weekend before.
Oh, we get it. You went twice.
I'm broke now, but I'm happy and a little bit depressed.
Oh.
Just because it was such a moving experience and it was over. I'm like, I'm just have to go back to my monotonous life after this.
Yeah. Yeah. I've really only been to a handful of concerts.
It was really special.
The first concert I went to was on a blind date with a woman. We went and saw Dashboard Confessional outside in Ogden, and it snowed on us.
Wow.
It was kind of magical. I didn't care for it.
That's funny.
But I do love plays and musicals, but those aren't loud. I just don't like loud. That's my thing. Yeah. Anyway, we would like to provide a variety of voices and perspectives. So today we're joined by Molly Flake.
Hello.
Molly, it's so good to have you here.
Thank you.
So
Happy
tell
to be here.
us a little bit
Give us
about you.
the scoop. Who is
Okay.
Molly?
That is Molly.
Okay. Let's see. What is interesting and exciting about me? So I'm bisexual. I am a music education student at UVU. I also work full time as a pharmacy technician.
Does that mean you count pills?
I do count so many pills. I know a lot do drugs too. So
You have a really diverse portfolio.
I know, kinda
music
strange.
and pharmacy does not.
I know it's weird.
Do you play instruments?
I do. My main instrument is my voice.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you sing us a little something?
I don't know. You have to pay.
I do love
I
concerts.
know you love concerts. Yeah.
Would you give up your voice to marry a prince?
Never.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
A princess, maybe.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. No, I would not give up my voice.
So you play
Yeah,
other
I
instruments
do.
besides the voice?
Yes. I play the piano, although a little amateurly, and I play the cello as well.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
That's really cool.
Those are like
Yeah.
the two best instruments.
I love a
I agree.
cellist.
Yes.
They're so
Me too.
big.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Molly, we're thrilled to have you on.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And you were just in a production of The Lamb of God that your stake did that you were kind of like in charge of a little bit?
I was not in
Stake
charge
did
this
the
year.
Lamb of
My
God. I
stake
feel like
did.
that's a bold move.
It was really good.
It's the
Wow.
second time we've done it too.
Ooh.
I know. I was in charge last year. I was on the stake music committee. But this year I was not in charge. My roommate was, and so I was involved. I was the narrator in Lamb of God.
So we're here today to talk about the gay adolescence, and maybe we should define it.
Yeah.
All right. So there's this idea that when you are LGBTQ and you are a youth, you miss some developmental milestones. So for example, straight youth, they get to have crushes on peers and talk about those crushes, and they might even get to go on dates with them and introduce them to their friends and their family.
Well, and there's a whole manual about it. Like the For Strength of Youth has a whole dating section that's
Yes.
this is how to do it properly. This is how to grow with yourself and set boundaries and understand consent. But LGBTQ people don't have that.
Yeah, and so for people from my generation, an older generation, if you will, we also didn't have representations of queer people in the media, or not very many. And if they were, they were usually just comical or really sad. And so we didn't get those experiences, those maturing experiences of love and romance and learning the difference between infatuation and love. And so people who come out later in life have to go through all of that and learn all those things. So they're like teenagers or adolescents, but they're adults.
Yeah, they're operating in an adult world with it's interesting. It's like the idea that in some ways you grow and develop completely normally and like into adulthood, but the areas that are like suppressed because of orientation or shame, those areas never get to grow. And then so there's this juxtaposition of being in an adult world with aspects of your character and development that are really underdeveloped, and that can create unsafe situations, awkward situations. And that's the gay adolescence.
And you miss red flags, and like I said, you don't understand the difference between love and infatuation. And if someone shows love to you, then you're like, oh my gosh, this person loves me, therefore I have to do all these things to prove my love, otherwise they'll leave me.
So we can basically it can be dangerous. So we're going to talk about like the dangers presented and kind of how to move through that as an adult when you have thoughts.
Yeah, it's been really interesting because I have only started the coming out process really within the past couple of years.
How old are you now, Molly?
I'm 26. Yeah, so I came out to my parents about almost a year ago. I should look up the date. I think it's almost exactly a year ago.
Wow.
And I had come out to a couple of friends before that. The first time I really came out to myself was in I remember the day, it was 2021 in June. And so it's been really tricky navigating this area of like exploring this new sexuality, especially as like a mature adult who's been like, I've done a lot of development, and all of a sudden this whole new like aspect of myself is like opened up.
And you kind of feel like an idiot, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's so hard because I really like to consider myself this like mature person.
Competent,
Yes. And then all of a sudden I'm like in this situation where I'm like tongue tied and saying awkward stuff, and like it's painful, you know? I feel like a teenager. So for me, if it's okay if I share, for me it was a little bit difficult because when I first came out to myself, it was like, oh, I'm bisexual, but which I will say being bisexual is difficult because I feel this like pressure or duty to like make the right choice, you know, because I can still fall in love with a man and get married in the temple. And so I came out to myself and I was like, I'm bisexual, but it doesn't really matter because I am going to marry a man, so I don't ever have to tell anybody. And then slowly I began to realize that I was like withholding pieces of myself from the people that I love the most. And so I began to, you know, come out to more people. But even then, like when I came out to my mom, I was like, I'm bisexual, but don't worry, Mom, like I'm not going to be dating women. And same with several of my friends who I know are a little bit more conservative or a little bit more uncomfortable with, you know, gay stuff. It was kind of uncomfortable to like be like, oh, I'm gay, but don't worry, I'm not going to act gay, I'm not going to be gay. And then all of a sudden that shifted for me, and so it feels,
you like set yourself up for failure.
I did. It feels uncomfortable, and I know a lot of people have had this same experience as members of the church and also members of the queer community.
Oh my gosh, I had the exact same experience where I was like, I'm gay, but I'm gonna do only church things, and then I was like, actually, guys, I like this guy.
Yes, and it's so uncomfortable to like have to be like,
it's like coming out twice.
Yes, and it feels like, yes, like I'm gay and also I'm actually gay. Like I'm gonna like kiss girls and stuff. And I think that it's tricky to be holding all this pressure while also like this pressure to be like righteous and covenant keeping while also trying to understand and explore this sexuality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's added layers of shame. I remember the first person I came out to was my cousin, Rachel, and that was a really difficult conversation, like so hard. And then 3 weeks later, I had an even harder conversation. I told her that I had a crush on a real life person. And like, it was harder the second time. Like, it was harder to admit that it was like a real person for me. And it was so funny because I was like, she's going to hate me, which is funny because 3 weeks before she's like, it was perfect, right? Yeah. And she was like, that's what you were telling me? And she's like, you told me you're gay. Of course you have a crush on someone. I was like, what? Like, crushes are real? So I feel like in a church context, so much of it is like the identity piece that once you like wake up to an actual attraction or let yourself get there, it's like a whole new like freak out almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, you know, everyone knows that I dated this guy, Jordan, and I told this story in my book. There's a whole chapter about him, and I told it in like a really safe way, like a really, really
palatable.
Yeah, and that was on purpose. And when Jordan read it, he said that I was too kind to him, which was true. And I just want to give an example of like what the gay adolescence was like. So he was the first guy I really liked, and I was 29. He was also in his 20s, And he never dated a guy. I never dated a guy. And so when we like started to love each other and like verbally say like I love you, I want to spend my life with you, like all that stuff.
You said that to him?
Of course I did.
I didn't know you said that to him so soon.
So I had known Jordan for a while, but then once we like admitted that we liked each other, so we'd already.
Wait, that's wild to me. No, I feel like that's so serious.
Well, I told this story in my book where before we'd even come out to each other on midnight, like after midnight on New Year's Eve, he told me he loved me. But it was like I thought it was like a bro way, but I was like,
Right.
oh, that feels good on the inside. Somebody just like
Cute.
kept saying it. So once I was like, I like you.
I didn't know it was like I want to spend my life with you.
Yeah, totally. No,
So dramatic.
I was all in. We talked about if he would take my
Wow.
last name even.
Are you kidding me?
No, it's
You
all
were
true.
more serious with Jordan than I was with Ryan after like many months.
Look, I was like adolescent. I jumped a lot of jumped really quickly into like
moved right
this is
through.
the person I'm going to marry, okay? And we weren't even in the same state. Like this was all on the phone and on Skype, which is what we used to call Zooming. And so then after like 5 months of this, like us talking all the time and being in love, I came up to Utah for a work thing. And I stayed at his house. And I set all these ground rules. I was like, we are not going to do this or this or this, but we can do this and this. Like I had set these rules. And he immediately started pushing against what I like the boundaries I had set. And one thing I did not understand at the time is you can both want to do something and not want to do something. And so I had told him I didn't want to kiss him. But I wanted to, but I had made the decision not to for like values reasons. And he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And after a few hours of that, it was late at night, we ended up kissing. And that was not a good experience for me because I had set a boundary, but I also wanted to do it, but at the same time, I didn't want to do it. And Jordan has long since apologized for this. He was a kid. I was 29, but a kid.
You were both kids.
Yeah, we didn't know what we were doing. And so I understand why it happened, but at the same time, that was a really negative experience for me. And I immediately like regretted it happening. But then we kissed again the next day and I was fine with it. So,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it was like, he pushed me in ways that I don't think someone who was mature would have. And also I let him push me because I loved him so much that I didn't want to disappoint him. And that led us to do things that I didn't want to do.
I see. Thanks for sharing that. I'm sorry that was your experience, and that's an incredibly relatable experience. And I'd say it's a pretty mild experience.
Yeah. Because it was just kissing,
As well. I mean, when I think of the gay adolescence, safety is the number one concern I have. Like, I immediately go to safety, and I'm definitely going to come back to that. But something I pulled from what you were saying is like infatuation for love, and this idea of like, oh my gosh, I have a crush, so we're going to get married. That's very, very, very common. And we see this in high schoolers. We see this in sixth graders who are drawing like Mr. and Mrs. on their notebooks, right?
Mr. and Mrs. Charlie Bird.
Exactly.
Charlie Flake.
And it's like, if you can think of like, if you're straight and haven't had to go through this, like when you're young, this is how it is. And then you have like your first crush and your first date and whatever. And there's just like there's almost like this understanding that like who you date in high school may not be who you marry, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's like for practice or fun or whatever. I've seen a lot of gay individuals. First of all, a lot of people don't want to date, and a lot of people start like you were saying, like I'm not gonna date. And I have also seen that just realistically, I've said this before. I don't want to freak people out, but most people I know have been in a scenario where they like someone who likes them back, and they're both LGBTQ, and then it presents a lot of like stressors, right? So I'm being practical here. Like people date when they're gay. People fall in love when they're gay. Shocker. And it's important to talk about the safety because like, I don't know. There's so many approaches where people are like, just don't date, stay in the church if you want to be safe. Like almost like a super, super abstinence mindset. But the reality is people date and people get into really dangerous or bad situations very quickly because of the adolescence and like there's no family support or anyway, like I'm going to get on a lot of soapbox during this episode.
Or because it's secret and they can't talk to anybody.
Exactly. So one thing just that you reminded me of is I've met so many couples, gay couples, who have met young, and they kind of like trauma bonded over, I'm gay Mormon, you're a gay Mormon too. And then that has like turned into love, and they've confused feelings of like love and longevity and respect and consent and everything for just like, you're the only person that exists and gets me, so I'm latching to you. And it's like this emotional attachment based out of trauma. And I know so many gay couples who've been married very young and have been divorced after 2 or 3 months because it's just like the gay adolescence, right? Or dating or moving in together or whatever. So that's like something to be aware of for the individual and for a family member who might be watching this happen.
Yeah. Like, quick side note, and I want to hear your stories too, Molly.
Great. Yeah.
I have a friend, and he had met this guy on Tinder or something, and we were talking, and he's like, I love him, we're gonna get married, we've already talked about it. I was like, great. Like, how long ago did you meet? And he was like, we met on Tinder a few weeks ago. I was like, oh, what was your first date like? He's like, well, we haven't met in person yet. I was like, whoa. and honestly, like we talk about this, like, oh my gosh, like, how could that happen? But this is a very normal process.
So common.
It's just part of the process of like emotionally maturing as a human being who is starting to have romantic feelings for people that they're attracted to.
Yeah. For me, the gay adolescence has been really tricky because, I mean, it is for everybody. It's been tricky because I'm not very resolved about what I'm going to do about dating. Like, my goal has always been not to date. And then all of a sudden this person came into my life, a girl who really liked me and wanted to, maybe not date per se, but wanted to make out, and wanted to like be together. And because that was so exciting and so enticing to me, and because it was also a little bit secret, like not a complete secret, but we're super telling people, and also because we're already breaking the rules by seeing each other, I didn't know what boundaries I could set as far as what I could ask for, and I accepted things that I never would have accepted from a man. For example, she was seeing other people but still treating me like a girlfriend in a lot of ways, and that was extremely painful to me. But I felt like I couldn't ask for like us only because we didn't want to date, because that's against the rules with the church. Yeah, and I'm still an adolescent. I'm still learning, and that's like, anyway, it's really uncomfortable to like go through that experience. But that was like the biggest thing, is I realized I didn't know what I could ask for, and I didn't know what I could ask for.
So, looking back, what would you have asked for?
I don't know. I think that's a good question. This is very recent, by the way. I'm a baby gay. A baby gay in this dating world. I think maybe something I would have asked for was a little bit more respect as far as like discussing the other people that she was seeing. And also, I think I would have asked for more friendship versus like romance. Yeah.
A theme I'm seeing in both of your stories is like self-respect and consent.
Yeah.
And it sounds like both of you were in the situation where you like knew this was not okay with you, but you wanted it, and you were trying to bend to the other person because of a lack of self-confidence and emotional vulnerability.
Well, because when it's the first person that you like really love who says they love you too, or lesser feelings even,
sure,
it's like, well, I have to do what they want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because this is my only option.
It's an uneven power dynamic. It's such a vulnerable position, and that's where safety is going to come really, like, that's why I just always come back to like safety. We have to keep people safe if they're emotionally vulnerable. And growing up as gay, just in general, there's shame attached to it, and negative self-talk and poor self-worth. And growing up gay in the church often like expedites that and expands on that. And so we have this situation where these people who, like me going on dates when I was with girls in high school with like for strength of youth as my guide, literally so easy. I was just like, but then like me going on dates with someone I'm actually attracted to, and there's an uneven power dynamic, and I feel like you were saying, like you have to bend to someone's will in order to be worthy. Like as gay people, we're always trying to prove our worth. That's like the number one coping mechanism is overexertion and fawn, right? We talked about like fight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn is the idea that you're always trying to please and placate the other person. And it makes sense that we would carry those same things into a relationship scenario and give too much and be taken advantage of.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, talk to us about the secrecy of all this and how that played into your experience.
I want to preface by saying that I am extremely lucky because I have parents who are very, very supportive of me. And so I did call my mom and cry to her at least once a week about this situation. But I didn't want to talk to my friends about it because they were judging me for stepping into this situation. I don't really know if they were judging me for the situation or because it was a gay situation. Probably both, you know. And
Molly, I would never judge you for any situation.
Oh my gosh, Ben, that's so nice of you. Thank you, I appreciate it. I think also church and having to be discreet about it in that community. I'm trying to be a little bit cautious with what I say, but going to church and feeling like I have to be discreet about my relationship, it put this weight on me, and I felt like I didn't have as many resources for dealing in healthy ways with this. Also, some family members who I normally would have talked to about this the whole time were really unsupportive, and it made it so that I just kept it secret.
Yeah. Talk to us about what it was like talking to your mom about this.
Mom, if you're listening, my mom does listen to your podcast, by the way.
Hello, Sister Flake.
Hi, Mom.
She is a sweet angel and perfect and amazing.
I bet she has beautiful red hair.
She has white hair now, but yes.
Okay.
Do you think I'm a redhead?
I thought you were a redhead.
I call you strawberry blonde.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that's great to know. I have a friend who's a redhead and he doesn't think I'm a redhead. Anyway.
Johnny Bowers.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that's because he's such a
Asking
redhead.
him on the podcast.
we argue about it all the time. Anyway.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
It's Johnny, it's a spectrum. No, yeah. My mom okay. At the risk of being a little too vulnerable, I've always had a really hard time confiding in my mom about relationships because I was molested when I was a child, and that really severed the connection that I had with her, and I felt like talking to her about these kinds of things were not safe. And I didn't even thank you. I didn't even tell her about that experience until I was an adult, and it's been really difficult to overcome this preservative instinct, because I was told as a child that talking to your guardian about something like this was unsafe. Anyway, so this was the first time in my life that I really made an effort to reach out to my mom about something like this.
Which is really brave.
And if you knew my mom, you'd be it's not even brave. She's so perfect and sweet. Why are you even scared? But it really was a big test, because if my mom had reacted negatively, it would have been really devastating. But I remember the first night I called my mom, and this was after I found out that this girl liked me. And I said, Mom, this girl likes me, and I can't be with her because of the church, and I like her more than I've liked any guy ever. And my mom just cried with me. And I think it was so helpful to be able to just call her and tell her about whatever was happening in my relationship. And she was a little bit cautious, because she was like, this girl is seeing someone else while she's seeing you, and that makes me really nervous, But she was never this girl.
Mom had a normal adolescence. She could see more clearly what was happening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. But she never, I think the difference is I brought this situation to another friend, and they were like, you're stupid for accepting this. Whereas my mom was like, I would encourage you, if you're wanting this, to pursue it, but be cautious. And so I never talked to that friend after that. I mean, I'd still talk to them, but I never turned to them for guidance, because I knew it was stupid, but I wanted what I wanted, and it just made me feel like an adolescent for her to say that to me. Whereas my mom was just accepting and cautious, but never judgmental. Yes.
I've noticed an incredibly troubling trend where members of the church, even if they're supportive of an LGBTQ person, conceptually, when the person, and if and when the person starts dating or starts liking someone and wants to kind of explore that, for fear of condoning sin or for fear of doing the wrong thing or social implications, they'll pull away. Mm-hmm. And I really, really wholeheartedly believe that that is the absolute worst thing you can do. Because all that is doing is taking away a resource from someone in a vulnerable position. And it adds to that shame. And it just, like, I think we know this, like, secrets make you sick. If you're doing something in secret, you're not going to make it as good of decisions. And it can take you to like bad, dangerous, unsafe places. And I want to share a story, and I'll like give a trigger warning of sexual assault. And I share this story because it has been very impactful for me, but also because it's incredibly common. And I've seen renditions of this time and time again. So last year I was working with an individual in therapy, and I will call him Mason. And Mason is amazing, like great student, return missionary, just a good person. And he's gay, and he had a lot of shame for it. And there was one time that he came into the therapy session and like couldn't talk to me. He just stared at the ground for like 25 minutes. And, you know, I was trying to let him have his space, but also like, obviously there was something going on. And he just started sobbing, and for another 15 minutes he was just crying. And then he told me this story that harrowed me to my core. So essentially he told me that a couple weeks prior he was feeling really low. He was depressed. He was shaming himself. He hated that he was gay, kind of spiraling in these what if anxiety-ridden scenarios. And he wanted to talk to someone, but his parents had been really unsupportive, and he was scared of his roommates. And so Mason created an app on an anonymous dating app, an account on an anonymous dating app, and didn't put up a picture. And he met somebody else who also didn't have a picture and was there anonymously, and they started chatting in the middle of the night. And they continued kind of this like electronic relationship. Every night they would get back on the same app, find each other, and talk. And for a while it was really validating, because there was this person who accepted him. His orientation, the fact that he was gay, wasn't off-putting, and this person was showing interest in the part of himself that he had hated for so long. Like, his orientation was starved of love, and when he was getting it, it was, you know, he wanted to move towards that. It felt good. It was validating. So after a couple of weeks, they decided that they wanted to meet in person, and Mason was really afraid that somebody would see them out, find out that he was on a date. And so he was like, it has to be at night, and let's just drive up the canyon. And so they decided that at 11 p.m. Mason was going to get picked up by a stranger who he'd never seen or talked to in person, and he didn't tell anyone where he was going because he was too ashamed. And they were talking, and it was going well, and this other man who was much older than him started making physical advances, and it was really confusing to him because he was excited. It was thrilling. He felt loved. He felt interested in someone who had been hating himself for so long. You can imagine what that would be like if you're like, if someone has called you ugly, everyone's called you ugly your whole life, and then one person's like, oh, I think you're beautiful. You'll move towards that. And in the same way, he'd hated his orientation, and someone was like, this is the piece of you I'm interested in. So he accepted it. But the man kept going, and Mason didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know about consent. He was so overwhelmed, and he just froze and was horribly taken advantage of. And as he was telling me this, I was just like, like any other way, like if he had someone to talk to, if he could have shared his location with someone, just at least like anything else but this, right? So he comes home, and the guy thought everything was fine, but he was devastated, and he stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He didn't go to church. He felt so unworthy. He felt like it was his fault. He was really confused. And I just watched this beautiful soul become so damaged because he did not have a support line. And I'm sick of it. Like, I see this happen all the time. I get thousands of DMs a day on Instagram, and many times it's people with similar stories. And they say, I don't know who to talk to. I don't know who to tell, but I kind of trust you because I've listened to your podcast or whatever. And they say, this is what happened to me, and I feel like crap, and I hate myself even more. And I just like, guys, like, we have to wake up. And we live in a world where returned missionaries are coming home thinking they're going to make it work with a man or a woman, and they're incredibly vulnerable situations. And many times, at best, they become addicted to pornography. And at worst, they become addicted to a person who is raping them. Like, this happens all the time. And it's because there's not social support, and there's not people that have self-confidence and have been able to develop boundaries and boundaries and boundaries and consent and personal self-worth and values. And I just I can't live in this world anymore. Like, we have to do something about it.
Yeah. Charlie, this is an emotional thing for you to share.
Of course.
And thank you for sharing that. I know that this is something you're really passionate about, and this all comes from a place of like shame and secrecy and hiding.
And like, do we want so if you're a church member or a church leader and a guy like Mason's in your ward and says, I have a crush on this guy, I want to go on a date, the first thing you're going to say is, well, don't do it, right? Don't do it. That's bad. He's going to do it, right? He has agency. If a gay person decides to go on a date, do we want them on a double date? Do we want them sharing their location with friends? Do we want them telling their parents who they're going to be with, how they met, where the person is, what time to expect them to be home, someone to process and talk with at the end? Or do you want them hiding in secret in a parked car up a dark canyon? Like, oh my gosh, people, wake up. We can't keep forcing this on to children. Mm-hmm. I have another friend who was invited to a party, and a similar thing happened. And I said, why didn't you bring someone with you? He said, I didn't have anyone to bring. I said, would that have happened if you had a friend that just was along for the ride? Of course not. Like the worst thing you can do if a gay person comes out and starts dating is pull away. And like, it's like, I don't care about your condoning sin. Like, people are getting raped, and it's happening. And I see it all the time. And I can't believe we're in a world where we convinced ourselves that it's safer to pull away from someone when they're vulnerable. And it's safer to put them in a dark position and then say, well, that happened to you because you shouldn't have gone on a date in the first place. Come on. I'm not going to accept that.
Yeah, we need to do a much better job of being with people and their experiences so they can be safe. When I have friends who are going to start dating, I say, call me after, tell me what happened. I want to hear about your dates. Like, I want to hear what's going on, so that these kinds of things, so I can be a support system for my friends that are in these situations. I think it's also important for people to understand what consent is and what that looks like. So if someone isn't getting consent, that we at least know and you can just say, hey, you don't have consent to do this thing, and effectively communicate. Because it's hard when you don't know. Like with this guy who was up the canyon, you said it was something he kind of wanted to do, but he also really didn't. And
he's confused. He'd never been there before. He didn't know what to expect.
And when we can understand, what those emotions are like. And the problem is, had that happened when he was 14, he wouldn't have been able to go somewhere alone.
Exactly.
But when you haven't had these maturing experiences, but you have adult resources, people get into a lot of trouble.
That is the best way to say it. I remember I started dating basically when I moved to New York, and I'm 25 at this time. And I was definitely a gay adolescent, had like the experience of like kind of a sixth grader. And it was so difficult because the resources are like a man in a big city that I've never met with an apartment. You know what I mean? Like, in the expectation of like coming up and watching a movie or sleeping over, like all of these expectations that adults have in a regular dating world. And also it's interesting because like we've created this world where gay people leave the church. Like, you have to, right? Like, that's like, you either stay in the church and stay single or leave the church and date. And obviously I'm pushing against that because it's not working for me. But it's like the church protection layer does not exist. And like the people dating outside of the church are like have expectations of what dating looks like and how to be an adult, and it doesn't necessarily reflect LDS morals. And then again, it's that idea of, oh, I feel like I have to placate this person because I want them to like me because it feels good to be liked, and I feel like I have to conform to this societal expectations of me, even though it's going against what I believe is self-respect.
Yeah. Molly, looking back on your experience, how could those friends that you didn't feel comfortable talking to, how could people have helped you during this time where you were in this relationship that was a pseudo relationship?
I think I think a big part of it is not only acceptance, but like encouraging me to be imperfect and to make mistakes. And I think, and so I'm saying this to myself as well. I think, and if there's someone listening who's in the gay adolescence and is feeling like maybe they want to try dating, but they're like terrified of it, I think it's so important to have so much compassion, whether you're the friend listening to a gay friend, or you're the gay friend, like so much compassion for yourself, because we are allowed to make mistakes and do things a little bit wrong, and step into situations that a 14-year-old might find themselves in. And I think the compassion makes you safer, because then you're not ashamed and accepting things that are not okay. Also, I think understanding that I liked what you said earlier, Ben, about like the confusion of like wanting something but not sure if you're wanting it, and like if we can like take away the shame and like understand that it's okay to want to kiss someone of the same gender, you know, and then you know what you actually do want and where those boundaries need to be, what you don't want.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk more about that, because that seems like a really common theme. Can you kind of dig into that? Like,
Yeah.
when you wanted to kiss Jordan, but you also felt like he was forcing it and you weren't sure if that's what you wanted.
Yeah.
Like that moment.
You know, this is like 5 years ago, back when I was a BYU student. And, you know, I knew that same-sex dating wasn't allowed as a BYU student. And there was this guy I'd met who I thought was really, really cool and really cute. And he seemed to like me a little bit too. And we were hanging out. And then I acknowledged that I liked him. It was a very awkward situation. But anyway, no, the whole story doesn't matter. And then at the end of this, he was like,
That was really cute.
and at the end of this, at the end of the night, when he was leaving, he was like, I would like to kiss you. And I said, no, thank you. But I super wanted to kiss this guy, like super bad. But because of this BYU boundary, I was like, I'm not going to do that. And he was great about it. But like in that moment, I wanted to, but also didn't want to. But because I'd had that experience before with Jordan, I knew that I wasn't going to do something that I would later regret.
Yeah. And I think I wonder, had you not been at BYU, how that would have gone and where you would have set your boundary.
Right.
Because it's almost like people default to the church boundary, and the church is always a safe boundary for them, or the BYU boundary. And what I've noticed is, as part of the gay adolescence, is like, because like gay dating is like quote unquote off limits in the church boundary, there really is no boundary when they enter it. And it can be really dangerous, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, I did this, so whoop.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, this is a sin, so nothing matters.
Yeah.
And people are attaching their moral compass and their moral code to this structure that they felt like kept them oppressed. And it's not coming from an internal place of like, what am I actually okay with? Me, not me with church pressure, not me on a mission, not me at BYU, not me based on what mom says I should do. Like, what do I actually feel like is comfortable and consistent and is going to lead me to feel like I had a meaningful, romantic experience that is not crossing my personal boundaries.
Yeah.
And like,
and of course, like, two consenting adults can use their agency however they want. Like those are their choices. The problem is when someone is being pushed to do something that they don't feel prepared to do,
or don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one thing that's important to know is that just because you want to kiss somebody doesn't mean that you want to have sex with them. And I think that was like maybe confusing for me to realize, was like breaking one rule as far as like holding hands or kissing a girl didn't mean that I had automatically broken all the rest of the rules and that I had to give up all the rest of the rules, because if I don't feel okay with something else, that's still a rule for me. Yeah. Just like what you're saying, Charlie.
So often this is a trauma response to repression. And I know so many gay men who have been on their first date and done way more than they anticipated or ever thought they would ever possibly do. And it's just like I want to cry for them, because like things that should be like beautiful and special and sacred with someone you love are like they feel robbed. And it's interesting because like I was talking with someone and I don't know how like real I can be. Like
you've been pretty real.
Maybe we'll just put a trigger warning. But anyway, I know someone who the same night he met someone who was his first kiss. Later that night they had sexual relations, and he was devastated afterwards because he didn't know what had happened, and he was terrified of STDs. He didn't know anything about protection or anything. Like didn't know anything. Didn't know where to go get checked for STDs. Was ashamed to go to a doctor. Like all of it, he was just spiraling. And he told his mom. And his mom said, well, you shouldn't have kissed him in the first place. That's why this happened.
Yeah.
And again, it's just like, y'all, we got to wake up, because now we have this individual who's had a horribly traumatic experience based on a trauma response to repression. And now they're like terrified and like need medical help, but don't know where to get it or how. And I just, oh my gosh, like this is the stuff that keeps me up every night.
Yeah. And this kind of stuff happens far too much in our community.
And no one talks about it.
Far too much.
Because like, who else is this kid going to tell?
Yeah.
He told his mom and it went horribly wrong. She shamed him for it. Mm-hmm. So now he just lives in his shame. Yeah. And that's his coming out experience. That's like, welcome to the world of freedom. Yeah. Where you're in a different cage.
Yeah. And one thing I want to mention on a similar but different note is, like, I am not, like, I've never been like trying to date. That I've never been trying to, but I still have crushes on people, and I will still like people, and sometimes they'll like me back. And I'm like very much a gay adolescent still, because I just haven't had those experiences. And so now that I like know this, I recognize that stuff happening. So this just like happens to people, even if they're not looking for love and romance.
Exactly.
So I'll give you an example. There was a guy in my ward a while ago. It was Eric. I'll just say it was Eric. But we were in an Elders Court presidency together, and I really liked it, like, super bad. And like after
Will, I hope you're not listening.
It was many years ago. And I like asked if he wanted to hang out after, and he did not. He had something else to do. And I drove away like from the church, and I was just like so sad.
There's rejection.
Yeah, I felt rejected. And as I was like driving, and like I've got pretty good self-talk. Like I talk through things with myself. And as I was driving home, I was like, Eric doesn't like me. What does that say about me? Mm-hmm. And then my immediate thought was absolutely nothing. Mm-hmm. And
you were like 32.
Yeah.
And imagine if you were 18.
Exactly. And so this kind of stuff still happens, you know, and just to like understand that we're going to have these extreme reactions to people, like with relationships where we have a crush on someone or they have a crush on, like, we're going to have these big reactions. And like what I've been trying to do, like, is just like mature through that without actively dating. And that has been like
that's hard to do.
Yeah.
That's really hard to do because you're not like having the experience.
Exactly. But I'm still like trying to do that.
Okay. Something that you're talking about, Charlie, I think this just needs to be acknowledged. You're talking about a lot of these, specifically you're mentioning gay men who go on dates and get taken advantage of. I just want to acknowledge that this has happened to almost every woman that I know, where they go on a date with maybe an older man, and then they get taken advantage of in some way. And I think that I think we need to talk about that. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the solution is. Communication, maybe, but I think it deserves to be acknowledged that this is a battle that women have been fighting for forever.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. I tend to, like, most of my experience is being a gay man.
Yeah.
And like,
totally.
That's who gravitates toward me.
Yeah. The stories that you hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. I even remember one time I was on a date and I was not assaulted, but I was made very uncomfortable, and I communicated clearly no to this man, and he kept making advances to me. And afterward I was shaking and like in tears. And I remember talking to my friend, my really good friend who was gay. And I was like, you know, just like crying about this experience. And he was like, oh my gosh, like, I just realized that has happened to me on a date with a man as well. And that like opened my mind to this experience that so many of us have had that we haven't talked to each other about.
Yeah. It's dehumanizing.
Yeah.
And it feels like when something like that happens, you need to hide it.
Yes.
I'm wondering if the common thread would be like uneven power dynamic. Because I'm like, I don't like, it's not like men do this. It's not like this is an inherently male thing to be disrespectful of someone's boundaries. But I do think that a lot of times there's an uneven power dynamic in a relationship setting.
And a sense of an entitlement as well.
So, ugh.
Yeah.
And we're vulnerable to it when we are keeping things secret or when we feel like we deserve less. Like after my date, that horrible experience, I felt like it was my fault because I hadn't said the right words or whatever. And that's very, very common when it comes to sexual assault victims.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people need to, you blame yourselves. And people need to be able to communicate that and have self-compassion, like you were saying earlier,
Yes.
for that scenario and the way they acted in it. And have someone to process it with.
Yeah.
A safe person who's not going to judge.
Yeah.
You know, I teach this class on campus called Understanding Self and Others, Diversity and Belonging. And we have a consent training every semester in my class. I have someone come in to give this consent training. You know, we only have 28 days the whole semester, but I feel like this is important. I want them to know the resources that are available at the university as well, so that if something does happen, there are resources. They know who to talk to, where to go. And almost every semester, I have one or two students come up to me and talk to me about something like, I didn't know what had happened was not okay. Like I didn't realize I could have done
So
that.
common.
And you know, reading a book about consent or like watching a video about it, like really empowering ourselves with tools to know how to set boundaries is really important.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, like, I know this is very prevalent among gay men. I'd be interested to know, like, what's like generally happening with gay women.
As far as like sexual assault goes?
Yeah, or just like, how does this gay adolescence appear in that context? Is it the same or is it different?
No, well, in my experience, I can't speak for everybody, obviously, but in my experience, it's been very different. The person that I have dated that has been the most respectful of my physical boundaries, at least, has been the woman that I dated. That has not been the case with men that I've dated.
And another piece that I'm thinking about, I almost wish this was like a live so we could like pull like questions from
Yes,
other people.
Totally.
Just because I'm wondering what the audience is thinking, and just maybe if you're listening, you just need to like take a deep breath right now and like squeeze a stress ball,
Yeah.
gurgle some salt water. I don't know. But another piece I was thinking about is just like the availability, like the social structure of dating when you're gay and a member of the church. Whereas like take someone like my brother. If my brother was on some of these dating apps or trying to like find a partner at a bar, I'd be like, what are you doing? Like, hello, wake up. Like your future partner is not at the local bar for him. Like, I don't know, maybe she could be. I'm not like, it's not bad to go to a bar, but I'm just
Charlie
saying,
is shaming people who drink.
no, I'm not. But I'm just saying, like, to meet his goals and the kind of life he wants, like, that's probably not the environment that's most conducive towards that, right? And so what I would say to him is like, talk to people, meet people, be open, go join community activities, talk to adults that you love and respect and say, hey, do you know anyone? Like if you're actively trying to date, do it that way. But I see, again, with gay men, I don't know what's happening with gay women, but it's just like, well, I'm gay, I better go to the gay bar because that's where gay people are.
Yeah.
Or, well, I guess I'm getting on Tinder or Grindr or a dating app, and that's how I'm going to find somebody else who's gay. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we literally have like innocent, naive return missionaries walking into bars because they don't have anywhere else to go. Mm-hmm. And that's their frame of reference for what it looks like to date when you're gay. And that sucks. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to work.
Yeah.
I got more to say. I keep going.
Well, Molly, I want to hear
Yes.
like what you're going to do differently next time. But like now that you've had this maturing experience.
Oh man, it's so hard because I don't really know what I want. And I think that's what makes it so confusing in the gay adolescence. And that's what opens you up to being taken advantage of, is you don't know what you want and then you step into a situation and just accept whatever. I mean, yeah, I don't really have an answer for that. I don't know if I want to date women yet because it's easier dating women and it feels a lot safer, unfortunately, dating women. And women tend to like me faster than men do. But it's against the rules, you know? And I don't really want to fall in love and I don't really want to fall in love with a woman.
Well, I think if there's anyone listening who doesn't know what they want, the advice I would give is boundaries, boundaries, boundaries,
Yeah.
open communication with people you love and trust,
Yeah.
and develop your own moral code separate. Like I remember when I was first coming out, and I was like, I've just been blessed, and maybe it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and I've been able to see people make more public mistakes and kind of like avoid pitfalls. But I remember thinking, like, to be realistic, like, I hate even having this thought, but realistically, most gay men I know leave the church. And so one day I sat down with my scriptures in a journal, and I thought, if I ever leave the church, who am I going to be? Where am I going to root myself? Where am I going to ground myself? What is me separate from this institution, right? Religion, belief set. And I wrote that out, and I was like, okay, this is me. These are core parts of who I am. And I have stayed in the church, and I plan on continuing to stay in the church forever, right? And I'm so glad I did that, though, because I feel like my moral code isn't forced upon me. It's from within me, and that has helped me move forward and avoid, like, I've literally so many times been in these situations where there was an uneven power dynamic, and I felt like an idiot. I was like, how did I not see this coming? Like, I'm alone with this man in his apartment, and I was like, and he's pressuring me. Like, that's happened before, and it's horrible. And luckily I was able to be like, no. And one time I literally just like left, and I ran and just like blocked the dude, and it was embarrassing, but like, who cares?
You were like Joseph of Egypt.
Yeah.
Except he wasn't dating Pharaoh's wife.
and so, like, I imagine, like, what would it have been like if I didn't do that?
Yeah. Charlie, as you were talking, the story that is related came to mind. A few years ago, I was looking to buy a house, and I had a realtor, and like housing prices were just like suddenly skyrocketing. And I was like, and houses were like on the market for like half a day, and then there'd be like 50 bids, and they would go for like 50,000 over market value, like over asking. And it was insane. And he's like, and he kept pressuring me. He's like, Ben, if you don't buy now, this is your only chance. If you don't buy a house now, these prices are going up, and you will never get to buy a house if you don't do it now. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. And I was like stressed, and I was like, no, I don't have to do that. This isn't my only opportunity.
There's other options.
Yeah, maybe it was, but I guess we'll see.
We'll find out.
Still homeless, still home ownerless.
Yeah.
And I will we'll have to put the homo in homeowner someday. Anyway, sorry. But I think that a lot of people get into a place where they're like, if I don't do this, this is my only chance.
Mm-hmm.
And you sitting down and saying, this is what my life will look like if I end up outside of the church. You know, I think it's very good for people to sit down and say, okay, this is what I want a relationship to look like. And I deserve this kind of relationship, and I'm going to make, and I would rather be single than be in a relationship that doesn't fit these criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And honestly, like, I was in a place back then with Jordan where I would have given up a lot of things because I really felt like that was my one chance for love.
Yeah.
And I maybe it was. I guess we'll see.
Bye bye love, bye bye happiness. Hello loneliness.
But I think that's part of the gay adolescence. This idea of this is the one shot I have, and we need to be smarter than that.
Well, because it's a scarcity mindset. You think you're isolated and alone for so long, and you find someone else who is like you. It's like, oh, that's the only one.
Yeah. I saw you nodding your head when I was talking about that.
Yeah. I just really relate. I think that speaks to a lot of our experiences, and I'm finding that I'm relating to a lot more of this, not necessarily in my gay adolescence, but in my adolescence as a young woman that was dating men. A lot of times I felt like if there was someone who liked me that didn't meet certain standards that I wanted, I felt like I had to accept it because that was going to be the only time.
Because that's what you were worthy of.
Yes. Oh my gosh, so well said. Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone is worthy of someone who is respectful and loving and kind and treats them like they're the luckiest person in the world to be with you.
Yes.
But listen, when you're gay, though, you grow up thinking being told explicitly that heterosexual relationships are sacred and divine and godly, and that homosexual relationships are disgusting and perverted and gross.
Yeah.
And so you get to this point where you're like having a gay crush or entering like a gay dating world. How's the person going to view themselves? Are they going to feel worthy and divine and be looking for some sort of like higher, deeper connection? Or are they going to default to this is perverted, this is gross, and so I'll accept it because that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's all I deserve because that's who I am.
Yeah.
And it's so sad to me that these cultural currents are forcing these horrible situations onto people and saying that it's their fault. You know?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to honor your divinity. Like you in high school dating someone thinking they're the only person who will think you're attractive.
Mm-hmm.
That's awful
Mm-hmm.
because that's like discounting your worth.
Yeah.
You're a beautiful redhead.
A beautiful redhead.
Hear that, Johnny?
Take that, Johnny.
Molly, how did you get to this place of this is the best I can do to I deserve the world?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, therapy. Therapy's been so helpful for me. I had my heart broken by a man when I was like,
Same.
yeah, all the time. When I was, I think in my early 20s, and so just a couple of years ago. And at the time, I really believed that I could not be happy unless I had some form of him. And he was not interested in me, but he led me on for a really long time. And I knew that the way he was treating me was not fair, but it didn't matter to me because I couldn't be happy without him. And then he broke my heart and I was alone. And all of a sudden I found happiness by myself. And I just began to get to know myself and understand that my life can be so fulfilling and so wonderful and so amazing. And I don't need someone who treats me badly to have happiness. And it took a lot of therapy, it took a lot of self-reflection and a lot of healing to get there.
Yeah. And I think part of like being an adolescent and this gay adolescence we're talking about is this mistaken belief that I need another person to like complete me.
Yes.
And like you said, you found happiness being you, and then now another person will be additive to your life and not the purpose of your life.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, because I often talk to people like, well, I won't be happy if I'm single. I'm like, well, if you can't be happy single, you're not going to be happy in a relationship.
Yes,
Right.
It's true.
You know, another thing, what you're just saying reminded me, like, kind of like psychologically, people tend to gravitate towards people that make them feel like the coping mechanisms from early childhood. And so
Say more about that.
So, because of when you're gay youth experience a lot of shame and do a lot of fawning, placating. That feels very comfortable because that's familiar. That becomes familiar. So having an uneven power dynamic, being treated poorly, and having to overexert in order to fix that. What's the word I'm looking for? Like overcompensate for that becomes familiar, and living in that like neurological mindset becomes the norm. And it makes sense that in an adult relationship, if that's happening, that feels comfortable. That feels like love. Because if your dad loved you and that's what love was to you, but you had a bad relationship with your dad or a parent or whoever, and that's how you dealt with it, like that's like daddy issues, right? People say that's where it comes from. It's the idea that like, it's like recreating that because that's what's familiar and that's what feels like love. And that is something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Can I share a story from my personal life?
Yes.
I'm talking so much on this podcast, and I'm not trying to commandeer. I just really care a lot. And I have a lot to say.
Molly and I have had like one same-sex relationship.
So far.
So you guys are so adolescent.
Oh my
so
gosh,
embarrassing.
We're just little babies over
Just
here.
a baby.
I want to talk about my first boyfriend, and because I'm seeing themes and things.
Charlie, I'm not ready for you to talk about our relationship.
I'm seeing themes and like things I did well and areas where I was like, ooh, I was totally doing what you guys were talking about. So luckily I had kind of already established what I was going for. I had established my boundaries. I knew what I was okay with, what I wasn't. I'd communicated that to my family, to myself, even to church leaders. And also I decided that if I was going to date, I was going to date like give myself the same dating rules that I would expect like my brother to uphold, right? And so that was really empowering, and I think that kept me safe, and I think that allowed me to move slowly. But I was having experiences where I felt like I was expected to do things. I felt like a lot of people wanted pieces of me, but not all of me. And that was really, really difficult. Um, it felt like so many people were interested in me, like physically and sexually, but not for like what I actually feel I offer to the world, which is like charisma. No, but like and like my spirituality. Like there's so many pieces of me that felt overlooked, and that was a little bit deflating, right? Anyway, I ended up I downloaded a dating app, which again, like if you're doing it, that's fine. I wouldn't recommend in hindsight. But I met this guy, and he was so handsome. Like this guy was hot, and I was like, wow. And sorry, Ryan, if you're listening, skip a little bit. But I was
Ryan's also a good-looking man.
Ryan is very attractive, more so than this person actually. So if you're listening, which he's not, but I was like, we made plans, and I shared my location with my friends. I told my sisters, like I told everyone about the date, and it was interesting because I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I shouldn't, even though, like, my default was don't tell anyone, and I had to like actively push against that. Anyway, so we met up in Brooklyn, and we went on a date, and I was expecting it to be terrible because most of them were. Can I share more?
Yeah.
Can I share backstory to this?
Yes, please.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm sharing so much. I didn't anticipate saying any of this. So prior to that, I mostly tried to date members of the church because I wanted to find someone who was like-minded. And I've kept running into the same obstacles, which was, on the one hand, I'd be on a date with someone, and like occasionally they would like break into tears and start crying and say, I wish you were a woman and I shouldn't be doing this. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like,
It's a lot.
and then I become a therapist, and it's fine, but like, I didn't want that to be my relationship. And I was like, okay, like apparently like dating active members of the church is like not a thing, because it's just, I'm weird. I've always been weird. Like I've never known what to do with myself, and society's never known what to do with me. I'm in the middle, right? So I was like, well, then maybe like someone who's ex-Mormon and kind of understands the contextually. Yeah. And I would go on the dates with the ex-Mormons, and they'd be like, man, it's church and the general authority, and just like complain and be so bitter and crude about like people and beliefs that I love and hold dear and respect.
This isn't everybody, but some of the, yeah.
I'm telling you, it's not everyone, but I think it's less so now. But I mean, this is 5 years ago. Like it was hard. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to date somebody totally removed from this, because this is so loaded and I can't. Anyway, but then that was scary too, right? Because then there's all these other, it's so confusing. Have compassion on yourselves and have compassion on the gay people in your life. It is so hard. And I'm alone in New York City. It's hard. Anyway, so I go
like 10 million people there.
And it's so hard to feel alone when you're surrounded by people. Yeah. Anyway, so we're on this date, and it surprised me. He was as attractive as his photos were. He was fun. He was respectful. He was nice. And I love an incident. I love like something that has to fix, and he'd forgotten his wallet, and like you had to pay in cash, and I had to like run to the nearest ATM and like fix it. And I just loved it. It was like funny and
drama, yeah.
Good for the plot. Anyway, so we kept seeing each other, and he was really nice, and he was from India, and he was like kind of raised Hindu, but I don't know. He like was right on the border of Pakistan, and like he had a completely different culture. It was fascinating to me. And he like lived in a cool part of town. He was wealthy. He took me to Beyonce concert, which I love.
I'd rather not go. The music is too loud, but
she was amazing. But concert through line. Anyway, and I was spending a lot of time with him and texting, and it was so like it gave me butterflies, and love songs are making sense, and like we like found emojis that like represented us and became him, and I met some of like one of his friends, and it was just very like euphoric. It was beautiful. And I remember the first time we held hands was at this park next to the Riverside, and
Riverside Park.
No, it was in Williamsburg. But like I was holding hands with a man, and people around were seeing it, and I was like, I am free. And like it was just like so this rush of emotions. Like I never thought this was possible. And later, like at the end of that walk, we kissed and the same thing happened. I was like, oh my gosh, like, wow, this is a dream, you know? And so I didn't realize that this was happening, but I was falling in love with him. But in hindsight, I'm seeing that I was just falling in love with myself. I was falling in love with freedom. I was falling in love with New York City because he'd grown up there and knew all the places and took me to cool things and good restaurants. And so I'm having these experiences that are attractive and desirable and that I never had before, being a closeted kid from a rural farm town or Provo. Like it felt exciting and I loved it. And I was infatuated and I was like, I love him. Like I'm falling in love. Oh my goodness. And luckily I have sisters and friends who were really supportive and I would talk to them. And I think they saw red flags, but they didn't say anything. Kind of the same thing that your mom was doing. They're just like, well, tell me more. So for a couple months, that's how it was going. And then, you know, he was really respectful of my boundaries and I had very strict boundaries and I still do. Like it is hard to date me. And
so I've heard from Ryan.
yeah. And he never pushed me. And like, if I felt like he did, I would say it and he would be like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, oh my gosh. And, you know, one time I was telling Rachel, my cousin, this, and I was like, he never pushes me. It's amazing. And she was like, Charlie, I just want to offer the idea that that's like baseline being a good person. And you're talking about this as if it's some extravagant, grand, like he's the singular best person in the world. But that is baseline, Charlie. That is not what you deserve. And then, you know, we'd have a lot of conversations about religion. I was going to church every week. And one time we had this conversation and he is atheist. He doesn't believe in God. And that was
is that what atheist means?
It's what it means. And he like kind of like took a critical stance, but he wasn't like as critical as the ex-Mormons had been, you know? And so I was telling my sister and I was like, oh my gosh, like he's atheist and he kind of made fun of me a little bit, but like also like he's cool if I go to church. And she was like, okay, again, that's baseline. And so they gave me the time to start realizing ways that we were very incompatible and that the love and the infatuation that I was confusing for loving him was actually me just gaining life experience and falling in love with myself. And I also realized that kind of the same thing I brought in with the Mason story, that there was this piece of my soul that had been so starved. And he was first and foremost interested in me because I was gay. That's like how I was introduced to him. And I realized that was the thing that felt like love from him, just because he was that. And he was like feeding that had never been fed. And so after about like 5 or 6 months, I realized that wasn't going to be a good relationship for me. I started, like, I would sit in church and I was like, would he be here with me? And it just like wouldn't. And I was like, could I raise kids with him? No. And then I started realizing, like, I've never met his family. I've never met really any of his friends. Every time we hang out, we're alone. I'm hiding this. Is he hiding this? And I was like, there are so many red flags and I see them now. And I broke up with him and I felt great about it. And I am so grateful for that experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought he was the only one at a time. And then like I found someone who is all of those baselines and equally or more attractive, but like way, way better and like fills my like spiritual needs and emotional needs and has a family that I connect with and feels like my family. And I'm glad that I was able to move through that experience and learn those things. And I'm glad that there were people in my life I could communicate to that didn't shame me or make me feel like I needed to hide. And later down the road, we're able to say, hey, just look over here. And I was able to gain enough control and self-confidence to say, oh, you know what? I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think what's important about that experience too is that you didn't come out of it and think, oh my gosh, I had my first failed relationship because it was gay or whatever, blaming it on being gay. I feel like coming out of this my relationship that I've had a couple people kind of indicate to me that I'm heartbroken because I got my heart broken because I stepped into a gay relationship. That does not mean that it was a failed experience. And just like you said, like that experience, that's life experience. It didn't work because it was wrong. Yes. It didn't work. It's not that it didn't work because it was gay. It just didn't work because you weren't compatible and you had to learn that. And now it's adding value to your future experiences.
for sure.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about the importance of sharing our lives with people, talking to friends and loved ones about what's happening in our lives. What should someone do if they don't have someone like that they can trust?
Find someone, and you find people by stepping up. Like you have to come out. You have to put yourself in the position to find a like-minded person who's going to support you, and it's scary, but it's the only way. It's like jumping off the high dive. It feels like the only way to experience the euphoria of jumping off the high dive is to actually jump.
And there are people who are going to accept you and love you and be supportive of you. It's easy to, when you're alone, it's easy to believe that there aren't people out there, but that you will find friends, you will find like-minded people who will support you.
If possible, I would suggest to make it someone you already love and care about and have an existing relationship.
Yeah.
A lot of times, like I said, people will default to somebody else who's gay and is in the same position, and then that trauma bond starts, and then that same gay adolescence kicks in for both people and kind of ends in disaster often, which disaster causes more, So instead, make it a stable, consistent person that you already know, or someone who's removed from your orientation or attraction zone.
Yeah.
Because that's just going to be a lot healthier to process and be able to move through things.
Yeah. And when I worked as a therapist, yes, I would love for my clients to share everything that's happening. And as a professor now at BYU, I would love for my students to come and talk to me about, their dating experience. I want to be a safe place for them. And so I hope that people can always find someone that they can trust, who they can just share what's happening in their lives, and that can be received.
Ben, I'm wondering, we've talked so much about how the gay adolescence impacts relationships and dating. How does it impact you when you're away from that, single?
Yeah. I'd say the way it most impacts me is I don't have crushes on a lot of people. It doesn't happen very much. But when I do, it's suddenly intense. I'm like, oh, I want to marry this person. And I'm like, no, that's ridiculous for at least 4 reasons.
Maybe 5.
Yeah. But now I realize when that happens, and then I'll be like, oh wait, no, well this could never happen. I'm not gonna I want to pull myself away from this relationship for because it could never lead to marriage. I'm like, well, that's also ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so that's the way it impacts me. Is just these polars of this person is I'm going to spend eternity with this person, or I'm never going to talk to them.
Yeah, it's this huge pendulum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just noticing that happening and be like, this is ridiculous. I am being ridiculous. And just having that self-talk with me when I'm being ridiculous.
Yeah. Can we talk about a little bit about the discomfort of understanding who you're attracted to, and maybe it's different.
You're bisexual.
Yes.
I was going to bring that up because I imagine there's a lot more confusion there.
So confusing. I still don't understand platonic love versus romantic love. I feel like I could pretty much fall in love with anybody if I liked them enough, their personality enough. Is that different?
I mean, that's what people say we should force with women.
That seems lovely.
Very different for you guys. Okay. I wanted to say I even had a conversation with a friend of mine. She's a very good friend. We both kind of came out to each other in the same time. She's also bisexual, and a lot of times people have asked us if we're a couple because we have this energy, and it was so anxiety inducing for me because I was well, she's beautiful and awesome, and I totally could kiss her,
I know who you're talking about, and she is all of those things.
She is wonderful and so cool, and we had to sit down and have a conversation because it was actually after you asked us, Ben, why we had never hooked up, and I was
that is not what I said. I did not say why have you never hooked up. That is not what happened.
What did you say? You said, why haven't you ever gotten together or something like that?
Yeah, but it was probably more
I have permission from her to share this.
It was probably something
Knowing Ben, it was some sort of LOL joke.
No, it totally was. But it's
Ben is so red.
That may have been exactly what I said, but I would have said it as a joke.
Okay, well, no, yes.
The tone is important.
Yeah.
But it was so uncomfortable because we both kind of wondered, and never talked about it, and so we had to sit down and be do we want each other, and it almost felt I felt I was obligated to try dating her because I found her attractive, and therefore that means that I'm attracted to her. And it's so confusing because I actually since we had that conversation, we're like, we've been friends for a really long time and we've never wanted each other. And I think that means that we don't want to date each other, which is so obvious,
That's
but
mature.
like, it's confusing because anyway, I think of her as like a sister, you know, like a sibling, but it's also confusing because it could easily not be that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not an experience for you at all?
No.
No. Like, is it pretty clear when you're attracted to someone versus not?
Yeah. For me it is, but I'm sure you're speaking to tons of people who have similar experiences.
Yeah. I'm with you, people.
Yeah. Thanks, Malcolm.
Yeah.
You know, Molly, your experience with your friend, I think is really common. Like, do I like this person? Do I not like this person?
Yeah.
And, you know, here we're not telling people like go out and date. Like, we're not telling people what to do. But I think it's important that people live value-driven lives. And like, I'm living my life in a value-driven way. Like, I've chosen to stay single and that's working for me. And yet, even with that choice, I still have crushes on people and I still have to deal with that. And I am not fully mature enough to deal with them in healthy ways. And I'm learning to be mature. And so I think, you know, the reason this, you know, we've been talking about this from a dating context for the most part, but I think it's important for people to know, you know, what it's like to be in these immature spaces where you like someone, because it just happens. Like, we just naturally going to like people, even if we're not looking for it.
I also just want to mention, it just reminded me, one of the most isolating things about stepping into like a romantic relationship with a woman for me was feeling like I could no longer talk to God about it, because I felt like if I asked him about it, he was just going to say no. And if that's an experience that anybody listening has had, I just want to say, like, I just want to acknowledge that. And like the thought of no longer having like a heavenly parent who loves you or is proud of you was devastating for me. And I don't believe that that's true. And I just want to acknowledge that.
I'm so glad you brought that up. The idea of, I don't even want to pray about this, or I don't want to involve God in this aspect of my life, because what if he says yes and what if he says no?
Yeah.
And so it's better to just not know.
Yeah.
I like always involve God.
Yeah.
Bring Christ into it. Ask God, have the Spirit, and move forward that way. Like, that's beautiful. That's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Well, can we end on one funny note?
Yeah. Is it better than trusting God?
It's funny.
You're going to one-up my end note?
No. That's a good way to end. I just want to end on like a light note, since this was a pretty heavy episode.
Okay. Let's go.
Well, yes, always trust in God. So I know Molly through our friend Austin, and Austin has been on the podcast. He was on the Pride Flag episode.
Yeah.
And Austin also checks the questions in the closet email. So Molly was a listener.
Yes.
And well, you can tell the story.
Yes. Okay. So this was after the episode, Charlie, where you shared about your relationship with Ryan. And that was a very emotional episode for me. I had not come out to anybody yet. I'd come out to my friend, and that's it. No, I had no plans to come out to family, and I was really feeling super alone. And you were both so vulnerable with each other and shared really beautiful spiritual things, and it made me emotional. Anyway, so I emailed you at the end. You were like, if you have any questions, email this email. And so I sent you an email and it was just like, I'm a gay Latter-day Saint and I feel really isolated and alone. I'm really grateful for you sharing your experience.
So she thinks she's talking to us.
I thought I did. Well, I didn't care. I mean, I figured you had some kind of like, you know, someone checking the emails, but I didn't think it would be my close personal friend, Austin.
who also wasn't out to Molly at the
not
time.
out.
That's hilarious.
Yes, and so all of a sudden, Austin is like reaching out to me and is like, "You need to come over. Come, let's do a Disney movie night," you know. And I'm like, "Wow, Austin's so obsessed with me." Anyway, and so then I come over.
Austin wants to date me.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that's what I thought. No. And so Austin keeps reaching out to me, and so I finally come over, and we have this evening, and I actually came out before Austin even got to the point, but Austin starts telling the story about how he starts becoming friends with Ben, and then he's like, and Ben was just so overwhelmed with the emails, and he was like, and Ben like asked me, and I like gasped, and I was like, wait, Austin, and he like looked at me and like started nodding.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and I just want to say that it was actually like really powerful for me, because I felt, as I was like accepting my sexuality, I felt like I was kind of turning away from God. Like, by choosing to accept more of myself, I was like rejecting what I had been told my whole life, which in my mind that represented God. And all of a sudden this felt like this was not a coincidence to me, you know. This felt so like there was a divine hand in it, and that was the first time that I was like, maybe God wants me to be a bisexual. Maybe God is cool with me connecting with people about being bisexual. Anyway, so it was actually really powerful.
That's lovely.
Yeah,
So that-
funny.
So that was how Molly accidentally came out to her close friend and
Yes.
didn't know it.
And didn't know it. And he came out to me
Cute.
as a result. And now
That's cute.
Yeah. it's really sweet.
And they
God loves you a lot.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you, Molly, for being on this very vulnerable episode with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And to the listeners, drink some water, take some deep breaths.
Yeah.
And thank you for letting me share things that I'm passionate about and are on my heart. And hopefully I didn't scare anyone off. So, love y'all. Bye.
Thank you for joining us today. If you have enjoyed this or other episodes, please consider leaving a review, following us on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Questions from the Closet, or sharing this podcast with someone you love. And as always, please remember that we do not represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or Brigham Young University. We're not trying to be prescriptive or tell anyone what to think or what to do.
You heard 3 perspectives, and there are many, many more. We encourage you to listen to other voices and hear a wide variety of experiences. If you would like to submit a question or share a comment about today's episode, you can email us at questionsfromthecloset@gmail.com.
Until next time.